Dr. Nigel, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I know we've chatted and we definitely found some commonalities, especially in the work that you're doing. I think there's a lot to explore there, especially when you think about the Western medicine world we live in and some of the issues we're seeing, at least the chronic issues we're seeing with people's health. I think it'll be valuable to explore some of that as well. So before we jump into it, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what's brought you here today.
Sure, yeah. Thanks for this opportunity. So, my name's Nigel Brayer. I've been in private natural wellness, functional medicine, chiropractic, acupuncture practice for almost 29 years now. We're going to talk a lot about bladder function today, I presume, and such. But of course, that wasn't my initial calling, shall we say. And like
Mhm.
most things in life, it was a happy accident that kind of drew me into that space. And so some self-discovery and a story we can share a little later if you like about my wife and her struggles and us as a family, how bladder leakage issues really impacted our life, but then also I come to realize over the years how it impacts really millions and millions of people's lives, women in specifically, but men also for that matter. So I've really, over the last few years, dived into trying to offer some hope, clarity, and direction to people on bladder health. Obviously, I'm a male, and this seems like it would be fitting for me to be a female on this space since female health bladder issues, a lot of ladies feel more comfortable talking to another female. But I feel like this is my calling, and all gender aside, is there's a lot of answers and a lot of solutions outside of the current, I'll call it mainstream dogma. So I look forward to having that discussion and hopefully helping others as we go along.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it would be worth it getting into your personal experience with it because I think it's important to understand that. And most of the time, as you're talking about your calling, I've observed and experienced myself that calling often comes through personal experience. And then we get to a point where we're impacting the lives of others as well. While I appreciate you being in this space and it may not be traditional in that sense, but it is worth understanding from your standpoint what allowed you or motivated you to get into this space and how was it for you to navigate that? And I know you touched on your wife's health, but yeah, if you could share a little bit more in that space.
Sure. So I'm going to digress a tiny bit to your earlier comment is I call it following the breadcrumbs. I don't consider myself the smartest person in the world, but I'm really good at being curious. And let's be honest, it's all about self-preservation to some regard. There's an old saying is, how can you save yourself and save others at the same time? Is a lot of
Mm,
people think that for us to be in healthcare, it has to be purely self-sacrificial. And I don't really subscribe to that. I subscribe to there's a win for everybody. So in terms of my personal story is the suffering my wife experienced is after our last child, Jude, who's now almost 8 years old. She struggled with incontinence. And being a husband and a spouse is she shared that personal story, which took not, it wasn't as easy as just she just came out and said it. She, like
mm,
most women, hid it. She didn't want to share it. She was embarrassed at the fact that she couldn't control something as simple as her continence. And so this
mhm,
went on for months. And how it really came to light in my experience is she started avoiding things. She started avoiding exercise. She started avoiding travel that was more than 15 or 20 minutes in the car. Generally, we travel a lot and we see lots of different things. My wife's life just started to get smaller. And I
mm,
thought, that's strange. I thought maybe it was a new mother, the demands of that, the sleep deprivation, and those were all present. But after those things settled out, it still remained and worsened. So after some long heart to heart, some tears and sobs and whatnot, she finally said, she goes, I haven't been able to control my bladder. And I've just been trying to work around it and figuring it out and hoping it would go away. And after almost a year, it certainly didn't go away. And so
mm.
I did what most doctors or husbands would probably do is I was trying to look for answers and fix the problem. So I referred her to a gynecologist. I said, hey, let's start there. Maybe there's something up, something wrong. And of course, I've come to realize is most people would do that first step, or they would be stuck in where my wife was, is just hoping it goes away and work around it. Went to the gynecologist, did the typical exam. All the parts and pieces were there. They all seemed to work. So it's like, all right, can't help you. Why don't you go to a physical therapist, a pelvic floor therapist, and see what they can do? So, of course, we did that. And she followed through the recommendation, which I think was about 3 to 6 months. And we're in America, so there's a pretty extensive cost associated with that too, obviously. And she got a small amount of help, maybe 20 to 30%. So, of course, that was nice, but 30% incontinence is still not dry.
Yeah.
So we went to the next step. We went back to the primary doctor, the gynecologist, and they said, okay, let's look into like more assertive options. So they looked into beta blocker medication. We looked and talked about Botox injections, what are called urethral slings, where you go in and literally put in a sling under the bladder to try to take some pressure off of it. And none of those options sounded viable, given that she's a healthy, fit woman. At that time, she was in her middle 40s. And so it just didn't add up.
Mhm.
So the next step was I was racking my head about it, and I said, something's got to be wrong. 1 minute, everything's fine, and the next minute, it's not. It's not like the anatomy somehow miraculously changed. Yeah, I'd been through some challenges with childbirth, with gestation, and all those sort of things. So I just seemed like there was something missing. So over the next, I'll say probably a year, I started really digging deep into anatomy. And of course, all doctors know anatomy, but do we really know the specifics of each individual? And the answer is no. So
Right.
I started digging deeper. And what kind of intrigued me and led me down this path was looking at what's called the neurology and what's called the innervation, which is just $50 words for how are the nerves working and what components are affecting that organ. And so, what was really intriguing to me, and this is what branched me into where I am, is we're missing the whole target, whereas we're looking at the valves of the bladder. The valves will be called sphincters. And we're saying, hey, the valve should work. It's kind of like a muscle in your arm. It contracts, everything's good. Have a nice day. But what we don't understand about the bladder is only 30% of the valve is what's called consciously controlled. So I like to think of it this way, is you and I, Firkin, are sitting here right now, our heart is beating. Now, let's say you hear some startling sound outside, gets you worried. Your heart rate
Mhm.
goes up, your blood vessels constrict, you jump up, you got more blood flow to your muscles. You didn't consciously do any of those things. That all just happened as a result. And that's called your
Yes.
subconscious and your autonomic nervous system. Interesting is the valves of our bladder are only 30% consciously controlled and 70% autonomically controlled. So let's break that down for a second. That means that the valve that controls your urine is 70% controlled unconsciously by the sum total of all of your life experiences, your stress, your inflammation, your traumas, your things you put in your closet that you don't want to talk about. All those things are
Yeah.
influencing our autonomic nervous system. So the
Mhm.
same thing that's affecting your heart and blood vessels, which has a big impact on things like heart disease and cancer and autoimmune disease, is also affecting your bladder. So what does that mean to you and I? It's like we can't look at, it's kind of like us looking at the heart as a heart disease problem. Disease will be a heart symptom, but it's not a heart problem, it's a heart symptom. So bladder issues are bladder symptoms, but they're not bladder issues usually. They're usually lifestyle, autonomically controlled stress response issues. Full circle is so then I started delving into how can I influence a person's autonomic nervous system with the intention of helping my wife with the
Right.
side intention of helping me. Right?
Yeah.
So again, I'm not that altruistic to say, hey, I wanted to figure out how do I help get my wife back because she wasn't having a great time, but she's also my partner. And therefore, by default, it's affecting me dramatically. So, long story short, I started to look into biofeedback techniques that help us retrain and support our autonomic nervous system. I dug deeper into my expertise of acupuncture. I delved deeper into functional medicine, all those different factors of how do we address the big functional approach to the body. And then
Mhm.
I made a protocol and then I started testing it on patients in my office. And so I went through my patient files and I found 100 women in those files that were still part of our regular, I saw them once a year or twice a year, something like that. And so I'd ask them when they came in, I'd say, hey, how's, your bladder issues? And of course, almost everybody still had them. They were managing
Mhm.
with pads or whatnot. So I said, hey, would you be willing to, partake in this testing that I'm doing to see if we can get this under control? And of course, invariably they said yes. So over that next many months and year, we took my protocol and we started making it into a really simple step by step. And what we found over that next year is over 90% of the women we worked with, and we're not talking about just women like my wife, 45 years old, 1 to 2 children. We're talking about ladies who've had complete hysterectomies, who've had ovarian cancer, who've had radiation. We're talking about big, serious disease. And
Mhm.
everybody improved. The majority had full to 95% resolution. So I thought,
Wow.
wow, this is pretty cool. We've added no drugs, we've added no surgeries, we've enhanced their life as an individual. But oh, by the way, the bladders improved dramatically also. So from that, I said, okay, I want to make it accessible because one of the biggest barriers to this condition is people have, they don't talk about it,
Yeah.
or they're embarrassed and they don't ever take the next steps to get the help that they need.
Right.
So, what I wanted to do is say, how do I make this into something so simple that we can remove those easy barriers? So, what I did is I put it into a program form that people can do at home. And I started testing it also. I said, hey, if they're in my office and they see me and I'm doing specific procedures, can I have them do them at home with some general support from me, but not hands-on support and still get the same results? And what we found is they got the same results as though I was helping them do it in my office once a week. So from there, I said, okay, let's set a platform so that we can start getting this out to people so they can really just start simply at home and then get the
Mhm.
results. And if they're an outlier, then they can get some help as an outlier, but the most people are going to fall within this bell curve of they're going to get great results. And so
Yeah.
that's been my platform ever since. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for all of that. I appreciate you sharing the whole experience that you and your wife went through and what allowed you to find some sort of a solution to this issue. And I appreciate you also expanding on the shame that comes up with something like this and why people may not even be open to talking about it or seeking the help they need. Now, from your personal experience, I am curious because, like you said, this wasn't something you had background in. And obviously, you've worked in the chiropractic space, but, and then you also talked about following the breadcrumbs. But how did you convince yourself that this was a problem worth solving apart from the emotional side of it and how it's impacting your personal life and that of your wives? But why was it something that you decided to pursue? And what gave you that sense of belief that, okay, maybe I can address this problem, not even having the background in that sense?
Sure. So I'll hit the background part first, Firkin, is all doctors, I don't care what comes after it, is everybody learns anatomy and physiology. Okay. Now, what direction you go after, that's more of a technical standpoint. So if I say I learn anatomy and physiology to an extremely deep level, and I understand how to assess and diagnose patients at whatever level, where things divide isn't whether I'm going to be in internal medicine or whether I'm going to be neurology or whether I'm going to be a urologist, is all learn the body. When it comes to, let's say, chiropractic care or functional medicine care or acupuncture, those are techniques to influence that physiology and anatomy. So I would say that the expertise of being chiropractic is really based upon neurology and how the nervous system works. So I think what kind of led me is this was a blatant neurological problem. So
Mhm.
in traditional medicine, it'd say, hey, there's a neurological problem. Who do I send to? I send to a neurologist. Okay. But neurologists are busy looking at the brain, and that's valuable, but they're looking at like pathology of the brain. Hey, do you have plaques? Therefore, it's MS. Do you have some other disease that's affecting your gray matter? Maybe that's Alzheimer's. Maybe that's Lou Gehrig's. So there's nobody influencing the nervous system other than a neurologist, and they're going to be using chemistry to affect the wiring. And that
Mhm.
has validity. I'm not criticizing that at all, right? That doctor would have learned the same anatomy. Now, their specialty might be a lot deeper in the brain than, let's say, mine, but we've all learned the same thing. So I would say it put me in a very interesting position to say, hey, my job as a wellness doctor, chiropractic is part of that, is who's looking at the big picture. And I look at it this way is from 30,000 feet, you can see, I'll just make this up, half the world, let's say, or from space, you can see the whole world, right? From
Yeah.
the ground, you can only see 20 feet in front of you. So the more specialized we become as a healthcare professionals, I notice the more myopic our view becomes. So we look so deeply into our little sect that we miss some big picture. So that's where I feel so blessed, where my job has always been to take a really big picture look. And I think that's where the
Mhm.
curiosity came in, is because when you take a big picture look and you start looking at how all of these things interact together, okay, anatomy's there. The gynecologist affirmed this. Check, boxes checked. But she didn't have a lot of other options after that because she said, okay, the anatomy's there. Catch you later. But I guess the benefit that I feel has been drawing me is when you're up at 30,000 feet, you can really see patterns and trends, and bladder issues are a pattern and trend issue. It may
Yeah.
have come one morning or after childbirth or after a divorce or a car accident or any stressful event, but you realize it was like the bucket is once the bucket hit the threshold, the line, that's where the symptoms started to appear.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the cool part is I spent my whole career helping remove these stress accumulations. And if a patient comes in my office, one of the things I explain is I say, hey, the stressors in your life, there's physical stressors, there's mental and emotional stressors, and there's nutritional, chemical, hormonal stressors. All of those are accumulating in all of our lives. And our
Mhm.
experience of health or disease is really a reflection of how well we're managing or mismanaging all those factors. And what's so
Yes.
exciting is the bladder, the prostate, the digestive tract, the heart, they're all influenced the same way by that stuff. So I guess
Yes.
when I look back on it, it was an easy transition because I'm not necessarily going into some new and amazing field. I'm just taking what we kind of know intuitively and directing it towards an area that very few people are addressing, and the suffering is enormous. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And speaking of the suffering being enormous, so we've talked about the stigma around this. So we may not know fully how many people are suffering from this, but what are your thoughts around this aspect? Like, how many people are struggling with this? And I know you're talking specifically about women, but I also want to talk about how men can be impacted by similar things. But yeah, just want to get your thoughts around how many people are struggling with something like this.
Sure. So now this is just a Google stat, and it'll be a little off up or down, but it gives us an
Yep.
idea. Is right now in America that there's over 70 million women over the age of 40 that have ongoing incontinence. So if you think
Mm,
of America as 300 and some million people, we're talking what, 30% or so of
wow.
women. That's huge. Now,
Hmm.
30 million people are not getting treatment of any sort necessarily. But I don't encourage watching TV because it's not good for your health. But on a different note for research, is if a person's interested in watching television on some afternoon or evening and watching the commercials, you're going to notice that there are multiple commercials of adult diapers and adult pads.
Yes.
Now, they don't put them there for giggles, of course. They put those there because there's a noted need that nobody's fulfilling. So they're giving them not a solution, but at least some way to manage their day to day. So
Mm,
the fact that it's so prevalent and we see it even on television, not to mention the 70 million stat, and it's probably higher than that, but we're talking a huge swath of people. And there's been a joke said, I forget who I was talking to, but they said if this was about males' erections, this problem would have been solved years ago.
yeah.
And I laugh because that might actually be true. So many people suffer from this, and there's
Hmm.
really hasn't been any viable solutions out there. So
Yeah, for
interesting.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to come back to the male side of things, but first of all, you touched on the autonomic nervous system, and specifically, I would assume, when you and I chatted, we talked about, especially in the first world, like mostly kind of living in the sympathetic nervous system. But how do you calm yourself from that perspective and make those changes that are needed to have better stress management. And I've talked about this on the podcast many times before. We live in a world where there's constant stress, and some of it you could say, okay, it's reasonable, but most of the time what I've observed is it's unnecessary. Okay? So how do you then navigate that and address how you're managing your stress and keeping yourself calm, and then hopefully you're not dealing with some of these issues that you're talking about here?
Sure. I love that question. So, the first part of my Ironclad Bladder program is first is awareness. And where I usually like to do this is most of us can't see our own challenges. We can always see other people's challenges, but not necessarily our own. So, how do we become aware? So, my very first step with pretty much any condition I'm managing, this one included, is I like to introduce what's called the food and mood journal. Now
Mm,
people say, "Hey, doc, we're looking at my bladder. Who cares about my food? Who cares about my mood?" But here's the purpose of this is it starts to allow us to make correlations. And since all of us eat many times a day, it allows us to set habits. But more importantly, it also helps us to put in perspective how we feel. Because
mm,
most of us, let's be honest, if we're numb to the busyness of being, let's say, type A, strive, push, push, go, there's no time for any thinking or present minded consciousness. Like to do the food is I'm a notebook guy. So write down everything you eat and drink. And then I have people rate their mood or their symptom or whatever they want to track. I actually don't even care on a 10 scale, 10 being you have the best day of your life, 0, the worst day of your life. And what you do is
mhm,
you start making a correlation is I'm consuming this. At the end of the day, I'm making a generalized rating, 10 being the highest. So that at the end of each week, you have a maximum points, let's say of 70, and you get an understanding of being observant of my food and my mood. From
mhm,
that, what morphs without even trying is people start noticing things. And then I ask people not to take it with the heart of, I need to figure my stuff out. That's the energy of type A. I got to sit
yes,
down. I got to figure this out so that I can move on to something else. I ask them to take the heart of, I would like to discover myself of what makes me tick without judgment, because
yeah,
judgment's another thing that we have to deal with, right? So we
yes,
take that information and then we start seeing patterns like, oh my gosh, I consume these certain types of foods and then I feel this certain way. Or at the end of the night, I do these 3 things and then the next morning I wake. So we get to see these patterns. And the analogy I like to use is this one is you have a friend who's broke and your friend says, "Hey, Firkin, help me out. I'm broke. I need to manage my finances." And the very first thing that you're going to say is you're going to say, "Hey, friend, where are you spending your money?" And obviously they don't know. So they're going to say, "Hey, I have no idea." So you're going to say, "Well, let's start paying attention. Don't even change anything. Just pay attention. Write down every nickel you spend every day. At the end of the week, let's sit down together and talk about it." And it's going to become blatantly obvious at the end of the week with your friend. You're like, "Oh my gosh, you're buying a $9 cup of coffee every morning. Why don't we start there? That's going to save
yeah,
you some pretty big bucks every week." So the same thing goes with the food and the mood. Saying, "Gosh, every morning I wake up and I'm tired or fatigued or I'm grumpy." Then you can start looking at your food because food is chemistry, right? Drugs are chemistry, everything's chemistry. So we can start making changes. And then people go, "What is, again, does that have to do with my blood?" Well, it has to do with your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. When your blood sugar's on a yo yo train, your heart's
yeah,
on a yo yo train, your blood vessels, your bladder, everything's on an inflammatory yo yo train. So it's just the very first simple step. And you do that consistently or see some automatic changes. Now, that's not the solution, but remember,
yes,
we're the cause of all of our problems.
mhm,
So I cause my problems inadvertently, you cause yours. And so
yeah,
our job in the healthcare space at all is to take our knowledge and set a path that can be followed and make sense to people so they can lead themselves out of wherever they don't want to be and then lead them onto a better path.
yeah. No, that's great. I appreciate that. And maybe now we could probably take the segue into how does it affect male health as well? Because we've talked about bladder issues with women, but what about men? What are some of the issues and symptoms that men experience because they're not regulating their nervous system?
Sure. And actually, interesting, I just did a Substack pot or thing this morning on this. Obviously, the anatomy is a little different. Kidneys are the same. Kidneys you have on either side of your spine, they run down into your bladder. Male, female, it's all the same. Once you get to the bladder, the urethra, here's where things get a little different. Is the
Hmm.
urethra on a female is about 3 inches long. That's the tube going from your bladder outside of your body. And a man can be 6 to 8 inches long. Women have one sphincter essentially, which is a valve. It's two, but it's one because they're so close together, they work together.
Yeah.
Therefore, just because of how that works, it's going to be a little less controlled. Men have one right at the neck where the urethra, the straw, let's say, meets the balloon called the bladder, and the other on the outside, which is called the external sphincter. And there's several inches in between. But what's interesting about a male's bladder, of course, the urethra grows through a walnut-sized gland called the prostate gland. And that prostate is it's the producer of what's called seminal fluid, which is the fluid that would be expelled during ejaculation so that the sperm have a medium to swim and move. But that gland is also influencing that bladder. So men's bladder issues can be twofold. We can have issues related to sympathetic, parasympathetic. That's the
Hmm.
stress, that's the irritation to the lining, that's the inefficiency of the valves. But we also have that gland is influenced by inflammation, it's influenced by stress, it's influenced by chemical things. So we really have two different ways that it can be influenced. It can be prostate influenced, which is back to the three stressors: nutritional, chemical, hormonal, physical. But then you also have the same type of effectors that'll affect the sphincter, which would be those same three. So it's kind of, they have two different avenues can influence their body's ability to control the bladder. The cool part is it's not like each problem is a whole new thing you have to address. Is if
Right.
you address the big picture, all of those things in time start to balance themselves out. So because there's different anatomy doesn't mean that each anatomical part has a whole new process of that you have to address. Does that make sense,
Hmm.
Firkin?
Yes. No, I thank you for that. And I guess one of the questions that's coming up for me, and this is maybe just based on my perspective and what I've observed, which is often limited, but why are people not talking about this enough? Because I haven't observed that, but I'm curious based on the field of work you're doing, and you're obviously in the space. Are you seeing more and more people talking about this, and especially how we're regulating ourselves and how that's impacting our health? From that standpoint, do you see there's been a shift over the last few years, and where do we need to go?
Sure. So I'll come full circle with this question too, is I have not observed that people are talking about it a whole lot more. So I've tried to make sense of the whys of this. And it came to me is if we look at us as individuals, so we go back however many years to when you were, let's say, a year and a half, 2 years old, is what was the very first, besides, let's say, eating solid food, what was one of the very first milestones as an individual human being in our world? And that milestone is generally potty training. So we learned how to eat solid food. And the next milestone was you're getting rid of diapers. And then once that milestone is met, then you have the next one. So if we think about this as the subconscious, as your sum total of all the memories, triumphs, and sorrows that have been inside your mind from the very beginning, this one goes way, way back, right? It doesn't,
Yes.
it was before skinning your knee from learning how to ride your bike or a friend betraying you or whatever it might be. It doesn't really matter. And I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, so this is probably more in your scope, Friggin, but is these are deep-seated who I am type of formative moments. So I've, in my own observation, came to the conclusion, we're talking your generalized self-worth at stake right here. And
Mm,
then, so if you think about it is, and this is something I observed with my wife, but also what I've observed with a lot of other ladies that I've spoken to, is they have a deep-seated feeling of I'm less than because of this.
mm,
So now that's not true. And we know that in a logical
yes.
discussion. But when you think about these things that are forming us, that formed us as human beings, is it's almost like a missing piece. So I think about that silly show. What was it? It was a cartoon where emotions are different globes. I think it was a Disney cartoon of some sort.
Oh yeah, Inside Out.
And yeah, and you have like core values and you have these emotions and beliefs. And I think about this as those were core of I am a individual human being because I've met this milestone. And it just seems to me like talking about it, I've had so many people break down into tears. And I'm like, gosh, why is it such a tearful event? It's a physiological function that's not working, but it can be working again. But there's so much other stuff that is attached to it.
Mhm,
So one of the
mhm.
biggest challenges of I've had is having people actually share, and then you might see this in your own practice and experience, is human nature is we all think that our problem is inherently unique.
Yes.
And then, and again, I don't want to speak for you, but I'll just make an assumption is part of the job of any healthcare provider is to help them understand, although we're unique, you're not alone. And the
Yes.
freedom of having that I'm not aloneness, it's paramount. So when a
Mhm.
person or a woman says, hey, you know what, this is something that's very common, and there is some great answers and solutions, especially in the natural space now, but that is so freeing versus
Yes.
I've had this problem for 5 or years or 10 years, and I've heard about other people who have it and they still have it. So therefore, there's no solutions. But to realize that, hey, this is common, you're not alone, and there's these things that can be done to resolve it, super freeing. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my, I'll call it amateur psychology version of the
Yeah.
whys in my experience.
I think you're touching on some very crucial points, and I agree with you. That's been my experience in my field of work too, that people create this narrative that their problem is so bad and they're the only ones going through it. And sometimes it's just being seen in the sense that as a practitioner, just understanding and seeing them so they don't feel alone. And then, yeah, there is that deeper sense of connection when you realize that you're not dealing with this by yourself. There are other people who are struggling in similar ways, and that can give someone hope as well. But I wonder if there's a deeper sense here, and perhaps going off topic a little bit, but I think the fear that can also come because so many people are scared of aging and some of the consequences that come with that, especially health related. So I wonder if that's also a fear coming up for people that are struggling with bladder problems that, oh, is this another sign that I'm aging and things are just going to get worse from here? And that could also create some friction in that sense.
Agreed. Now, I don't know if this directly ties in with your question, but a mentor of mine told me this years ago. He said, Nigel, is once you no longer fear dying, you no longer fear living. Guess this is, again, probably a much deeper topic than I have expertise to talk on, but I do know there's an extreme fear for most people.
Yes.
And that fear doesn't just affect their drive to work, it affects and influences really everything that they do. But just from a physical standpoint, that affects your subconscious. And so, fearful people, whether they show it on the outside or not, that's influencing every aspect of their body. It's affecting what's called their sympathetic tone. So, what that means is, am I in a constant state or fight, flight, or am I not? So, it goes back into your type A first world nation comment earlier is I believe the fear is one of our big issues that keeps us in. If I keep revving the engine, I don't have enough time to think anyway. And then when I
Yes.
do finally shut down and crash and sleep, well, I'm sleeping. So I don't actually ever have to actually be present. And again, this will probably delve more into the mental health issue, but everything's connected is
Yes.
presence anywhere is presence anywhere. So if you can be present where you're at right now, that means your physiology is also going to be functioning differently because essentially your body is the blossom of the mind, right? As if your mind is calm and present, guess what your body's doing? That means you're anti-inflammatory. That means your heart rate's changed. That means your catecholamines have changed. That means all of the chemistry has changed because of that state of presence, which is
Yeah.
powerful stuff.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important because going back to that comment around being on autopilot, most of us are not taking the time to even check in with ourselves throughout the day and pay attention to the simple act of doing a body scan and checking in where am I holding stress? Is there tension or tightness in different parts of my body? We seldom pay attention to that. And the other thing you talked about was just the natural functioning of the body. And I think these symptoms that we've touched on and others, whether it's chronic pain or other sorts of symptoms, that's our body's way of telling us that, hey, something's wrong. There's something you need to change. And again, it all comes down to paying attention and being present, where you can notice your body giving you these messages.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that comment. And I guess for anybody listening anywhere to this or other discussions that would be had, is our body is really speaking to us all the time. It's like, unfortunately, we've been conditioned as a culture to quickly disregard that with a medication or a pill or what that might be. And I've just noticed that's really affecting us. And we can see this for most first world nations is chronic disease is absolutely out of control. Okay.
Hmm.
And of course, it's not a one sentence answer to all of those things, but the biggest one sentence solution would be is we just start being present with our physical self first. How do we feel? Why am I sore? Why am I grumpy? And asking just some open ended questions to yourself, we start to pay attention. And that's, again, back to why journals are so important. Not because people need to learn how to write or anything else. It's just people just need a moment or a reason to start making just general observations. I know a lot of parents
Yeah.
do that. Why is my kid not sleeping? Or why is he grumpy? Or this. We're used to doing it for others. But what the old saying goes is if you don't go within, you go without, right? So
Yeah.
most of us are busy looking with outside of ourselves, and the answer is not there. So even when it comes to my specific topic we're talking about, is it's really a process of introspection with tools to start to change. And I think
Yes.
I don't want to speak for you, but I would presume that's probably your job too, is
Yes.
introspection and awareness and giving people a pathway to start to add in new mental patterns of thinking, doing, and being. So the solution's the same, the specifics are different.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, I think one of the things I would want to test with you here too is that notion of journaling. And again, it doesn't, like you say, you're not trying to teach people how to write, but there's something around synchronizing our left and right hemispheres, right? Whereas most of the day we'll be in the left hemisphere, we seldom do things that engages the right hemisphere of the brain. But that's where you find, at least that's been my experience, and that's what I try to preach to the clients I'm working with as well, is when you're engaging both, you're finding creative solutions to your problems, but you're also more in harmony. And I think that's where we're noticing a lot of these issues and challenges because there's so much disharmony in our day-to-day living. And I wonder what your thoughts are with respect to that as well.
So I'm going to tie a little bit into my training in traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture is the premise behind, I'll call that technical type of assessment and treatment, is it's all about what you just said, Firkin. It's all about balance. They call it yin and yang. And of course, that sounds mystical, but it's really not that mystical. It's just like we have the right hemisphere and left hemisphere that have very different functionalities. We have the sympathetic and parasympathetic that have very different purposes in our physiology and our life experience. So I guess the awareness is starting to just see how off or on center we are, and then really notably making some thoughtful next steps to start writing. And people will also look at myself. And I find this funny because after all these years of treating patients, his patients will look at me and say, "Gosh, you're perfect." And the answer is, I'm not perfect. It's another outside of yourself. You're perfect. You do everything right. And it's like, I don't do everything right. I just managed to become more self aware at an earlier time because I,
Yeah.
like you, want to be healthy. I also want to have a balanced life. I also want good relationships and avoid some of the perils of aging that we have control over. So it's really just a fine tuning of awareness, and it's about balancing. There's nothing wrong with
Hmm.
striving, But it's like a car, is if you let the gas pedal to the floor too long, something's got to blow. The
Mhm.
body's can't repair itself when it's revved at full RPMs or the same speed. So it's really about getting, and that's an individual base because there's also different personalities, there's different constitutions. Some people are inherently more what's called parasympathetic. They're more sluggish, they're more laid back. That would be called yin in Chinese medicine. There's more people who are yang, which are go and push and strive. That's more, let's say, a masculine type trait. But we all have different varieties, but it's really about in the life experience to find that balance. But what's so exciting about that, not only does that help you live a more peaceful, joyful life, but it sets up the environment where the body can heal itself. Pure
Mhm.
and simple. So,
Yeah.
why are we doing all this? We all want to be happy. We all want peace. We all want good relationships, and we all want to be healthy. We just don't necessarily know how to get there. So, we strive around and look around outside of ourselves. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And the answers lie within. So that's what I'm hearing from your messaging. But yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Brayer. I really appreciate everything you've shared. I do want to give you an opportunity. If there's something we haven't covered that you feel would be of importance to touch on, please, I want to give you that opportunity right now.
sure. Really, one thing I'd love for people to get is, and I use the analogy of a cell phone, is I don't love technology, but it's a very valuable tool in the right circumstances. So when
Yes.
it comes to your body, it's not a whole lot different. You don't have to be a doctor to have a general understanding of your body. And I guess that's part of what my job is. And I guess something that I feel great joy if I can help a person have a basic understanding of their body and their anatomy and physiology, just some techie guy can give me a basic understanding of my computer, not so that I can do programming, that's not what I want to do, but so that I
Mm.
can function and navigate and avoid the fear and have the usefulness. So if you have that basic understanding of that of your body, your choices that you have to make in regards to healthcare will be entirely different. So I've heard over the years with patients, why are you doing that? I ask them, well, why are you doing this or that procedure? Because my doctor told me to. I
Mm.
thought to myself, and I helped them understand, say, well, let's talk about what's going on with your body and give them some understanding. And then I'll ask them, what would you do now that you understand what you do? Would you do what you just said you would? And they'd be like, no. So most people are relying on a third party to determine where their life and health go.
Yeah.
That's like saying, hey, Firkin, I want you to control my life. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. And you're thinking, gosh, thanks, but you're the best guy to make the best choices for you. But you
Right.
need some basic understanding. And here's what I want you to know. Now you have the tools to make some choices, or even so now you actually, could have, let's say, a mentor, a coach, or someone to help you understand if you have things that are outside of what you can make on your own. So I guess I'm encouraging people, don't be scared of your anatomy, just like I might be scared of some techie things from 20 years ago. If you
Right.
understand, it opens all the choices, and then you can comfortably make choices versus feel like I'm a victim of a procedure. I'm a victim of whatever the government tells me. I'm a victim of whatever the next influencer is telling me. You can make choices using your own aptitude, and you're going to benefit from it. So I guess
Yes.
that's my final platform, shall we say.
Okay. No, that's great. And thank you so much for sharing that as well. And I appreciate everything you've shared today. Now, for listeners that want to learn more about your work or find you online, what are some ways they can do that?
Sure. So simply they can go to my Instagram account or they can go to Dr. Nigel, Nigel Brayer, Brayer.com. There you can listen to podcasts like this one. You can learn about what we have to offer for male, female, and child and bladder issues. Also, you can learn about some of our concierge health services. So there's lots of great information. There's different food options and menu. There's just a lot of cool stuff on there. So that's a
Yeah.
best easy place to start.
Awesome. Well, we'll put that in the show notes. But thank you again, Dr. Brayer, for the conversation. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights with us today.
Thanks, Firk, and I appreciate this opportunity and I love the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.